Let's turn to Iran and the confusion around the Strait of Hormuz as well, which is gathering at pace. Now, having opened the strait on Friday for commercial vessels, as Noga mentioned, Iran has now moved to close the crucial channel once again. State media has accused the United States of so-called piracy after Donald Trump announced that naval blockade. The IRGC has added that Washington did not fulfill its obligations and that any ship approaching the straits will now be targeted until the US blockade is over. Now, Trump did speak briefly on the matter in the Oval Office today. He insisted that the US would not be blackmailed.
We have very good conversations going on. It's working out very well. They got a little cute, as they have been doing for 47 years. We're talking to them. They wanted to close up the strait again, as they've been doing for years, and they can't blackmail us. But it's going actually along very well, and we'll see. But we'll have some information by the end of the day. We're talking to them.
Let's bring in Andrew Hilliar from the International Affairs Desk. Andrew, I really can't keep up myself with what's going on with the Strait of Hormuz. We've had update after update after update, a lot of them coming from Trump and now from the IRGC themselves as well. They've just now released a whole lot of statements about ships attempting to make that crossing, saying that they will be targeted. And this really does raise the stakes. What is the current situation?
Well, the situation is very confusing, as you essentially alluded to there. Earlier on Saturday morning, there had been an uptick in traffic going through the Strait of Hormuz. That was after Iran's foreign minister on Friday essentially said that the strait was open. However, he told ships to use a designated route. Now, these are live pictures from the marine traffic website, which shows traffic going through the strait as we speak. Now, the designated route that Iran's foreign minister was talking about is up here towards this island, so taking ships through the northern part of the strait there. Now, what appears to have happened now is that traffic is coming to a halt again. There were reports earlier today of ships receiving radio messages from the Iranian Navy telling them to turn back, and several incidents to report as well. The Indian government earlier today confirming that 2 Indian-flagged vessels had come under attack. The Indian envoy has been summoned to New Delhi. Now, that came off the back of reports that 3 ships had been attacked today. One of them a tanker, which came under attack from an IRGC gunboat. Another one, a container ship, reportedly hit by a projectile off the coast of Oman. And also a cargo ship reportedly came under attack too. I just want to also, Jean-Emile, bring you this from Iran's Supreme National Security Council. That's Iran's top security body. Earlier today, and it's quite significant, it said that Tehran was determined to enforce monitoring and control over the strait until the definitive end of the war. It said it would collect full information from vessels, issue transit certificates, and require payment of what it called service fees. So we are far from a return to the status quo, which was freedom of navigation.
We'll talk about that status quo in just a bit. I just want to return to what's happening diplomatically, because while all this is going on, Donald Trump doesn't seem deterred. He seems to think that negotiations are still very much going well. He called Iran cute, and he said they have been so for 47 years. But now we've just had statements from the Deputy Foreign Minister saying that the country isn't ready for a new round of face-to-face talks. That doesn't sound as good as Donald Trump hopes. Not nearly as good.
No, not at all. And I will get to those comments very shortly. Just to go back to Donald Trump. Well, he said earlier today in that Oval Office meeting that he thought that things were going very well, that both sides are talking, good conversations are going on. So he still seems optimistic here. He had been very optimistic that a second round of talks would take place in Pakistan, even as early as this weekend. Now, there have been no signs of that. Speaking of Pakistan, however, Pakistan's Prime Minister and Foreign Minister were at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum. They left early this morning. However, on Friday, the Foreign Minister of Pakistan met with the Foreign Minister of Turkey, Saudi Arabia and Egypt on the sidelines of that forum. Again, no signs of a breakthrough, but clear evidence that there is still this push for some kind of diplomatic resolution. And to go back to those comments from Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister, he was speaking at Antalya's Diplomacy Forum. He said that no date had been agreed for talks and no date would be agreed for talks until a framework of understanding had been agreed. So both sides appear to be focused on this framework of understanding. He rejected the idea, Jean-Emile, that Iran would ever hand over its enriched uranium to the US, and then blamed the US for what he called maximalist demands, saying that the US side tweets a lot and talks a lot. Now, remember, Jean-Emile, a lot of this could be considered posturing. So there may very well be diplomatic progress going on behind the scenes, albeit at a slow pace.
I'd love to know what is actually going on behind the scenes. But let's go back to that status quo that you mentioned in the Straits of Hormuz and what it means. What are we looking at right now? Will things return to normal?
Well, look, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz by Iran, Iran that has in the past been called the black sheep of the international community by some, now discovering that it has leverage over the Strait of Hormuz. Add to that the blockade by the US of the Strait of Hormuz. And what you have here is a threat to the idea that these straits, the seas, are spaces of freedom of navigation, essentially. And that could be ominous for the reasons that you're seeing on your screen right now. And that is the extent to which the world economy depends on just a few vital choke points. You can see there the Strait of Hormuz, the Bab el-Mandab Strait as well, and the Strait of Malacca. These are all essential for the global economy, for oil, for energy, for a lot of things. Now, these strategic choke points are becoming even more important for countries. They are growing they're becoming strategic priorities, essentially, that are getting more and more important. Now, under the UN Convention of the Laws of the Seas of 1982, this the freedom of the seas is supposed to be guaranteed. So freedom of navigation, whether it's through the seas or through straits. Now, the US has been the biggest beneficiary of this, and it's also traditionally been the global guarantor of freedom of navigation. However, what this war could be doing is slowly unraveling that norm.
Let's find out more on that point with Yousef Alshammari, president at the London College of Energy Economics. He comes to us live from Riyadh. Thank you so much for joining us, Yousef. We're just discussing there about the status quo with the Strait of Hormuz. And I'm curious if you can get your opinion. Has the status quo changed forever? Are we at a point of no return for investors and for trade analysts, for people who really just want the economy to return to normal? Have we passed that point?
Good evening, Jean. I'm very happy to speak to you once more again. Well, I think we have some relief news over the past 24 hours coming from both the Iranian foreign ministers and the U.S. president. Yet certainly today that we have kind of an reverse course with regard to the situation of Hormuz. Well, what we can see now, the market has already dropped. Brent prices has dropped by something like 15%. And now they are both Brent and West Texas are trading below $100, something that we have not really seen on a significant level over the past 6 weeks. Certainly, everyone agrees that the situation continues to be volatile. And the good news is that we continue to have ceasefire. Certainly, that ceasefire is going to bring the two parties together, the U.S. and Iran, closer into reaching a deal. Perhaps the U.S. blockade on Iranian ports and the shorts into the Iranian oil exports continues to be an issue. That's why perhaps we have a reverse course in here. But I see no alternative to Hormuz. That's my brief answer to if the energy trade is going to change. And one reason here is because not just because Hormuz occupies something like 20% of the global energy trade. That's more than 20 million barrels of oil and petroleum products that pass every day. But also the GCC and Middle Eastern producers are the lowest cost. In Saudi Arabia, you produce oil at $3 a barrel, and no other country in the world will be able to produce this oil at this cost. And if you look at Saudi Arabia and some other GCC countries, they will be the last producers on earth where you're going to get oil from. So I believe there's no alternative to Hormuz, but I certainly think that GCC producers, and including, of course, OPEC like Iraq and others, will look for alternatives and try to reduce their dependence on that strait.
But when you see all of these contrasting statements that have gone on even in the last 24 hours, it's so difficult to keep up with what is allowed to pass through, what's not, and then how on earth do you actually regain the trust?
Certainly the freedom of international navigation is something to be preserved. That's not for Iran or even the U.S. That's preserved by the United Nations. And we heard a post coming from the UN Secretary General that the freedom of international maritime navigation has to be respected. But I believe here as this war continues and we see these negotiations continue to have their course, it will be still uncertain how this will develop. I think on the long term, if supposedly that the US and Iran come to a deal, we need to have some sort of an international kind of international powers. For example, I believe the UK and France are intended to take part in a protection of international maritime passage, like the Strait of Hormuz. So we need these forms of protection that keeps international energy exports and also international trade safe from whether piracy or international terrorism.
That is just with a few caveats, though, that is in the event that a ceasefire is maintained, and that's a defensive force from the UK and from Paris, leading those over 50 nations. It doesn't include Iran or the United States. Just in your opinion, given what we know today, how do we expect markets to react come Monday morning?
Well, certainly the markets continue to be very tight, and especially with regard to jet fuel. I think we're going to see a rebound in prices, with Brent perhaps trading at $105 on Monday morning. Physical markets way higher, so it could be $120 or more over the next week if Iran continues to blockade the strait for the next days or weeks. I wouldn't be surprised if we see continued withdrawal from strategic stocks, because we heard many airline operators in the UK, for example, that they could be expecting to run short of their jet fuels, then diesel and some other fuels over the next period.
We spoke recently about that price of $120 for a barrel of oil, and you seem to intimate that that was pretty much a threshold by which the United States would actually have to turn around and say this is no longer tenable. Are you still of that position?
Absolutely. That's why we saw the U.S. for now coming to try and find a deal with Iran, because the economic cost is now trying to be having an impact on the U.S. economy. Certainly, I'm not here neither on the side of Iran nor the U.S., but I think it's affecting everybody, and the whole economy will suffer, especially starting from the Asian economy, which will have an energy shock. That's because energy supplies going from Hormuz are physically supplied mainly to Asia, but the economic impact will be felt all over the world. So I think it is in the interest in the U.S. to try and find a deal, and the higher oil prices will go, the more urgent that will become.
Yousef Alshammari, thank you so much, as always, just talking about this energy shock that is continuing with the uncertainty over the Strait of Hormuz and what that could mean come a Monday when the markets reopen. Thank you so much once again from Riyadh.